There was a long silence around Amazon's Lord of the Rings related series, at least when it comes to official announcements. There were of course some rumors, especially about the cast of the show. Now, about a week ago, Amazon officially revealed the first 15 actors that will play in the show. We still don't know what roles they will play, but at least now we know who they are. It's also impressive that most of the rumors were also right so far. It seems the cast has a wide range, new talent with some young actors with potential, but also some more experienced actors. What first came to my mind looking into the list was that we find some Welsh actors like Morfydd Clark on it. You could ask, why is this outstanding? According to letter 144, Welsh was a huge inspiration for Tolkien when he created the elven language Sindarin. So she would be a good fit for an elf, and speaking Sindarin would be a lot easier for her. Some rumors say that she will play Galadriel, which I can totally see too, but it's still not clear if she will appear in the show at all. I see it as very likely though. Depending on when the show plays, Galadriel could be up to 6,400 years younger than Galadriel from The Lord of the Rings. Elves only age very slowly, and when they live on Middle-earth, maybe a tiny bit faster, but I can see why they would cast a young actress for the role. Cate Blanchett will of course be hard to reach because of how good she was in Lord of the Rings and how strongly she is now connected with the character. Cate Blanchett's voice is also very powerful, and I'm not sure if Morfydd Clark can compete here. We will see. The Welsh actress also plays in the His Dark Materials series and is definitely experienced. Looking forward to see her in the show. I also talked about Australian actress Michaela Cavanaugh in the last video. The name Tyra popped up from the auditions, which is most likely a codename, but would hint towards a North woman because of the Old Norse roots of the name. Cavanaugh was rumored to be in the series since July, and it was now officially confirmed. In one of the newer rumors, we found Emma Horvath, and she was confirmed too. Now we come to a bit of lore. On the list we find Puerto Rican actor Ismael Cruz Cordova, who also played in multiple movies already, so an experienced actor with a lot of potential. I can already see some comments complaining about Hollywood politics, but that is not what I want to discuss at all, and I would appreciate if this would not become the main focus in the comments. It's a complicated topic and I can't change things anyway. I personally just want a well-done adaptation that sticks to the lore as far as possible. Of course, there will be some changes. That was also the case in the Lord of the Rings films, and they are still great. We also don't know where and when exactly the Amazon show will take place in Tolkien's world, so there is still a lot of information missing and no base for being upset right now. I prefer sticking to the facts, and so far the series hasn't done anything wrong. For me, it is far more interesting what conclusions we can make out of this, because there are actually many people with dark or slightly dark skin in the Lord of the Rings universe. Tolkien wanted to create mythology for England inspired by Europe's own mythology from ancient times, and it also should give the impression of being ancient too. However, Tolkien still described several peoples as, quote, swarthy in the Lord of the Rings. He did not specify what exactly he meant by that. The first example I have is actually quite surprising. Breelanders, quote, but there was one swarthy Breelander who stood looking at them. So among the people living around Bree, we find some diversity already. Another surprise, this is also the case in Gondor. There dwelt a hardy folk between the mountains and the sea. They were reckoned men of Gondor, yet their blood was mingled, and there were short and swarthy folk among them whose sires came more from the forgotten men who housed in the shadow of the hills in the dark years ere the coming of the kings. This description reminds me a bit of the Dru Edain, who are also part of the Edain, which means men. The Edain were a group of men that escaped from the shadow of Sauron's master Morgoth in the Far East. They were one kin, but different in some details. However, all opposed the evil of Morgoth and Sauron together and wandered into the west to seek peace and freedom. Gondor was a huge kingdom at its peak. It went all the way down to Umbar, which was also part of Gondor at this time, so it makes sense that we find swarthy people in South Gondor and that folks mingled there. However, Gondor will be founded at the very end of the Second Age, but of course Umbar existed before. It was one of the settlements of Númenor, the ancestors of the Gondorians, and also located in the region of the people of Harad, who were also described as swarthy. Quote, "He scrambled a little way up into one of the larger of the bay trees. For a moment he caught a glimpse of swarthy men in red running down the slope some way off with green-clad warriors leaping after them, hewing them down as they fled." I also fully recommend reading this passage further. In it, Sam questions if those people from Harad could be truly evil and what lies or threats had led them on the long march from their home. It's referenced in the extended edition of The Two Towers too. In addition, we find the line in the quote from before, "From the forgotten men who housed in the shadow of the hills in the dark years, ere the coming of the kings." The kings came from Númenor, so those people lived there before the Númenorians came to Middle-earth. I think it's quite possible that the early settlements of Númenor will play a role in the show. This could also mean, for example, the ancestors of the Dune Landings will appear too. Interestingly, the Dune Landings are described as swarthy too. Quote, "Duneland and Dune Landings are the names that the Rohirrim gave to them because they were swarthy and dark-haired." As explanation, Dune means brown in Old English. The Númenorians, the Dún Edain, which means Westmen, did not recognize those people as related because their language was so different. Only much later they understood that there was a house of the Edain with a very different language, and some of them, those natives, settled in Eriador and did not go further to the west like the other Edain, so their already unusual language developed further independently, and with a much shorter lifespan in comparison to the Dún Edain, this development happened also faster than on Númenor. However, the Númenorians needed a lot of wood and, as explained, did not see those natives as their kin, but men that potentially fell under the shadow of Morgoth, so they drove those native men out of their homes over time and pushed them further into the land. As a result, they would be not the greatest fan of Númenor, and they became foes, a potential conflict the show could explore. We find, for example, Erin Vorn on Amazon's Second Age map, which is where some of those natives fled to, while others fled to the east to the Misty Mountains. Beyond that, Númenor devastated the giant forests of Eriador to satisfy their need for wood. This conflict was early in the Second Age. The question is, can the ancestors of the Dune Landings and the city of Umbar both appear in the show together? To answer this, we would need to know when Umbar was founded. Sadly, we don't know that. In a footnote from the Lord of the Rings appendices, we find the Great Cape and landlocked firth of Umbar had been Númenorian land since days of old. But it was a stronghold of the Kingsmen, who were afterwards called the Black Númenorians, corrupted by Sauron, and who hated above all the followers of Elendil. For those unfamiliar with the terms Númenor and Black Númenorians, Númenor was a big island west of Middle-earth, where the mentioned Dún Edain, the Westmen, settled at the beginning of the Second Age, and over time became the most advanced kingdom of men in the history of Arda. Númenor later went a bit crazy, and there was a group called Kingsmen, which was loyal to the kings, and a group called the Faithful, who opposed the direction those later kings were following in Númenor. Gondor was later founded by the Faithful, and the remaining Kingsmen became the so-called Black Númenorians and lived, for example, in Umbar. Famous examples for Black Númenorians would be some of the Ringwraith, at least that's theorized, or the Mouth of Sauron. I could imagine seeing the conflict between the Kingsmen and the Faithful in the show too. However, from the quote it becomes clear that Umbar was Númenorian territory for quite some time. In Appendix B, we in addition find the information that Umbar is made into a great fortress of Númenor in 2nd Age 2280. This is the earliest written date I could find, but fortification also implies that Umbar existed before this. I assume it was established when Númenor expanded on Middle-earth, creating more settlements around 2nd Age 1800 under King Tar-Minastir. Also, for the full story of Númenor, we in fact need Umbar. It's where the infamous Númenorian king Ar-Pharazôn will land on Middle-earth, so seeing Umbar in a show about the Second Age seems very likely to me, and it's a place that needs diversity to be accurate. Besides Ismael Cruz Cordova, also Sofia Nomvetti was confirmed, who played, for example, at the Royal National Theatre. However, to draw a connection to the conflicts of the ancestors of the Dune Landings and Umbar would need to exist around 2nd Age 800 to 1400 and be among Númenor's first settlements of Middle-earth. This is possible in theory because we have no exact date. In my opinion, it's still difficult because prior to Tar-Minastir, only Aldarion, before he became Tar Aldarion, and he would fit time-wise too, sailed a lot and also visited Harad, where he almost shipwrecked. He laid the foundation for Londayr, but it's not mentioned if he also established a settlement in the far south, which would be a very unusual thing to not mention if he did, considering that we have a lot of information about him. A huge problem that we have in this is that a lot of information we have about this early stage before Tar-Minastir is from the chapter Aldarion and Erendis from the Unfinished Tales, which could also be a story piece we could see in the series. Canon and coherency can be a problem with stories outside the main works of Tolkien though. In my opinion, Aldarion and Erendis reads a bit like Númenor had huge gaps in sailing to Middle-earth in this time, and when Aldarion was not sailing, nobody sailed to Middle-earth and the outposts were neglected, and when he sailed again, he found them destroyed. But in the history of Galadriel and Celeborn from the Unfinished Tales, we can read that the deforestation by the Númenorians was so excessive that the natives became hostile to them, as mentioned, and big parts of the giant forests vanished in Eriador, and this in very early times. Tar Aldarion is mentioned there too, but after his rule, Númenor neglected their naval efforts for around 700 years, and even in his rule, he had to take some breaks from sailing, which also reduced Númenor's efforts in increasing their ship fleet. This seems strange considering that the deforestation later went up to Tharbad and that a lot of wood needed to be transported back to Númenor, which required ships. In this regard, it seems those stories do not yet fit to each other to 100%, but of course in their core they make sense as Númenor massively increases their naval power 700 years later, and maybe these paragraphs only reference the time after this gap. So in conclusion for all of this, there are several conflicts in the Second Age that require diversity in the cast. The earliest one would be the conflict between Númenor and the ancestors of the Dune Landings. The massive deforestation in Middle-earth through Númenor, probably starting with Tar Aldarion, and as a result conflicts with the natives of the forests, led to them moving into untouched regions, for example Erin Vorn, and also further east towards the Misty Mountains. In Duneland, they became later known as the Dune Landings, and it was easy for Sauron to recruit them to fight against a common foe, Númenor, and their devastating expansion. After this alliance with Sauron, raids and fights against the Númenorians, burning their wood supplies, and later a devastating war against the elves of Eregion and Lindon, most of the forests were destroyed in that area. So this conflict has a lot of potential because the motives of the natives are very understandable and they could probably not foresee yet what an evil Sauron would be. Tied to this, I can also see the story of Aldarion and Erendis on Númenor. Then we have Umbar. Depending on when it was founded or when the series claims it was founded, we can see a wide range of scenarios. Umbar is close to Harad and was always a place Sauron had an eye on. In the lore, there were times where he did not dare to attack it because of the power the Númenorians had, but there were also later times where it was under his control. It's an important place and different factions spread their influence into the southern regions from there. It's a place that connects the peoples of the west and the far south, who else have not much contact besides in wars, and in Umbar their different motives and ideas can be explored. It's not west is good, south is evil, but much more complicated, especially more complicated than in times of war. I personally would love to see Umbar in the show, and I think it offers enough freedom for the writers and is at the same time also woven well into the lore of the Second and also Third Age. Some other fantasy shows have different locations and perspectives where the show switches between, and I can see Umbar being one of them for the Amazon show. It's just a really interesting place. From Númenor spreading their influence over the south of Middle-earth, putting heavy tribute on the people of Middle-earth to gain riches, making themselves not very popular in the process, over to the rise of the Black Númenorians and also Sauron spreading his influence in the south through, as Sam puts it, lies and threats. So the connection to Númenor and with this to big parts of the Second Age is there. Then we also have the War of the Elves and Sauron. It is tied to the other stories and explains the creation of the One Ring and the other rings of power. The hashtag is Lord of the Rings on Prime, and Sauron becomes the Lord of the Rings with the creation of these rings in the Second Age. In my opinion, it's with the events of Númenor the most iconic section of this time, and for example the ancestors of the Dune Landings, but also the Easterlings, could play a part in that too. It also potentially leads to the foundation of Umbar. So I see a lot of possibilities and potential connections. Time will be a problem though, because there will be men in the show who don't live forever, even though Dún Edain can live for several hundred years, up to 450 years for the direct line of kings. Without compressing time, this could become a problem. It must also be considered that in case Galadriel would play a bigger role in the series, not all events mentioned would fit. It is mentioned that Aldarion met her in Tharbad, but that's about it. She, however, plays a more prominent role in the events of Eregion. This leads us to other roles needed beyond Galadriel throughout the whole Second Age. We would need Elrond, Gil-galad, Celeborn, Círdan, Sauron and a Númenorian king, depending on the time, and maybe Celebrimbor. Robert Arameo, who probably replaced Will Poulter, could play a young Elrond, because many speculated Poulter would play this role. It's just speculation though. For Sauron, some speculate Joseph Maul, who is rumored to play the villain. I think Ismael Cruz Cordova could also be an interesting pick to play the Dark Lord, because Sauron can take whatever form he wants in the Second Age, and it could be a form he uses to make allies in the far south. We, for example, know that he used this to deceive the elves of Eregion. Could be an interesting plot twist. I could also see Daniel Wayman as Sauron in disguise, but we will see. For the others, it's hard to predict their roles, but so far I like that they use new talents. If we think back to the Lord of the Rings films, it was in parts similar. Elijah Wood just turned 18 during filming the first Lord of the Rings film, and he was also a new talent back then, who just played in a few bigger movies prior, like Flipper. Hopefully the cast of the Amazon series also works this well too, and we get a great series. Thank you for watching. I did a lot of research on Númenor to get the dates and connections right. It's quite complicated, but I hope you liked it. In the end, probably all my conclusions will be wrong, but we will see. If you liked the video, feel free to press the like button, leave a comment, and maybe check my other videos. I link some playlists in the description. In case you want to subscribe, consider pressing the annoying bell. If you still want to do more, you can follow me on Twitter, join my Discord. I also stream on Twitch. Next video will be either Games of the Decade or another Lord of the Rings related video. Again, thank you for watching and goodbye.